we've got a terrific business-like relationship. You know, he is very blunt with me about his views on issues, and I'm very blunt with him.
Barak, it's a great pleasure for me to host you here in Jerusalem.
I want to express a special thanks to Sarah, as well as your two sons. I did inform the Prime Minister that they are very good-looking young men who clearly got their looks from their mother.
Well, I could say the same of your daughters.
This is true. Our goal is to improve our gene pool by marrying women who are better than we are.
A little bonding for Bibi and Barak right there. We're going to talk about that trip and a lot more coming up now on our next roundtable, joined by ABC's Global Affairs anchor, Christiane Amanpour, Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic magazine. Thanks for joining us. You were on the president's trip this week. Rana, Foroohar, the assistant managing editor of Time magazine, and Dan Senor, formerly of the Bush administration, also the author of Startup Nation, the story of Israel's economic miracle. And Jeffrey, let me begin with you. You were on the trip. You labeled it Operation Desert Smooth.
Yeah.
Now, the White House made pretty clear from the start that people should not expect like a reignition of the peace process here. But what exactly did they want to achieve, and did they meet that goal?
Well, I think they did achieve their goal. Their goal was to reintroduce the president to the Israeli people, to go over the head of the prime minister, his new best friend, if necessary, in order to create space for future negotiations. His goal with Netanyahu, I think they also probably achieved this, which is to just sort of put his arm around him. You know, Netanyahu is in an insecure position in the Middle East, put his arm around him and say, look, I've got this Iran thing. I know you don't quite believe me, but I'm going to explain why I have this so you don't have to worry. And you certainly don't have to go off and attack Iran without me. You know, and that was, I think they probably achieved more than they thought they would achieve when they left.
Well, look, I think, as Jeffrey says, this was, everybody wanted to see President Obama in Israel. Certainly the Israelis had felt they had the cold shoulder for all of his first term. Was famous, the Chile relationship, which looked like it sort of schmoozed up and warmed up now in this term. But I think he's right. You know, he went to the convention center in Jerusalem. He talked to the students, the young people there. It was very moving. He gave a whole case as to the importance of the Israeli-Jewish relationship, how the American relationship was very close. And then he laid out Iran, peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and did the whole conclusion. From what Israeli officials told me, peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians was not high on the agenda. That was not the objective of this. It was, you know, nice to say it and very, very important, but it was about Iran. And the real question is, does this trip further what when it comes to Iran? Is it about cementing America to go to war if Israel so chooses? Is it about diplomacy? The Israelis gave him a big cheer when he said this should be resolved.
And it was interesting. We saw the
diplomatically.
Prime Minister. I want to bring in Dan Senor, but first show what Prime Minister Netanyahu said about Iran. He basically extended the timeline once again before military action would be necessary.
If Iran decides to go for a nuclear weapon, that is to actually manufacture the weapon, then it will take them about a year. I think that's correct. But we do have a common assessment on these schedules, on intelligence. We share that intelligence, and we don't have any argument about it.
Now, that was an interesting point he made, that the United States and Israel now in sync on the intelligence. We saw Prime Minister Netanyahu at the UN last year say it was 69 months before Iran would have a bomb. Now it's another year. So he does seem to be extending the timeline a little bit. Dan Senor, is that because he believes that Barack Obama, in the end, is going to be willing to strike militarily?
I think he was struck, as were many, about how strong the president's language was on Iran in Israel. So last spring at the AIPAC policy conference, President Obama said that his policy is prevention. Prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, not containment. What he said in Israel is, we will do everything we need to do, and containment won't work. It's not a policy preference. It will not work. In a sense, the president was taking on his own at home, saying containing an Iran nuclear program is unworkable. And for him to say that in Israel, on the ground, standing with the Israeli prime minister, was a powerful statement. So I think it had the effect of reassuring the prime minister. And the fact that the president seems, as Jeffrey said, to have discarded, or at least seriously subordinated, the Palestinian issue. He's taken the foot off the pedal on the Palestinian track. So he's telling Israel, we're not going to pressure you on the Palestinian track. We're no longer calling settlements illegitimate. We're calling them non-constructive. And we are actually going to sound tougher on Iran, is giving the prime minister the space to move
Rana, does that tough talk mean that some kind of military action is inevitable in this second term for President Obama?
I really don't think so. I think a lot of people will say, if not publicly, privately, that a military intervention in Iran would be really catastrophic, economically, politically. And I actually think that there are signs that it may be a better moment for diplomacy than we think. Last week was Iranian New Year, and the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, for the first time since the Republic was founded, actually said that he was open to discussions. He didn't say that these were off the table, that he wanted to move forward with diplomacy, and actually lauded the president. That's taken amongst Iranians as a big sign and something really different. So I think that this is a moment, the talk has been tough on the part of the president, but this is a moment perhaps to step back and let the Iranians move forward a little bit.
You agree with that?
I don't. I definitely think it's preferable not to have military action. I think, though, that we've been fooled in the past by statements from the Iranian leadership. They are moving in a definite direction. One of the main worries of American military planners and Israeli planners is that they're going to use this time, the Iranians are using this time, to install faster centrifuges in fortified bunkers. And the real worry on the part of the Americans right now is that Iran will sprint toward a bomb in between these international inspections. In other words, they're going to collapse the time to the point where it would only take a month or two to actually cross the nuclear threshold, and this is the big worry.
So what I hear from experts on all sides is that, you know what, they don't actually have to make the bomb. It is all about capability. And they may already be there. They may already not be far from there. The question is, will they take the decision to convert it to that? And as yet, obviously, there's no indication that they have. But the Iranians can play this out for a while like this, and so can the Americans. Some really do believe that this is the only way it's going to proceed for the next several months. Keep it on this sort of cooker, this slow-burning cooker, where you have diplomacy, you don't have the breakout to the weapon, and you see what comes up.
That's Iran. The boiling point may have already been reached now on Syria, and the president was questioned while he was in Israel on why he has not yet stepped in with more military aid for the opposition yet.
I think it's fair to say that the United States often finds itself in a situation where if it goes in militarily, then it's criticized for going in militarily. And if it doesn't go in militarily, then people say, why aren't you doing something militarily? My response at this stage is to make sure that what we do contributes to bringing an end to the bloodshed as quickly as possible.
Maybe I'm overreading this, Dan Senor, but the words that stuck out there were for me at this stage. And
Yeah.
and we know the president is getting pushed from several members of Congress, Democrat and Republican, to take more robust military action. He's been reluctant so far. Members of the administration has been for it. And even though he was still pushing back a bit, he did leave the door open.
Sure. In fact, when I talk to government officials in the Arab world and in Israel, and I say, what do you think of the U.S. foreign policy these days? The one word they say is Syria. That Syria is a case study in U.S. foreign policy failure. 2 million people internally displaced, 1 million people in refugees in Turkey and Jordan, 70,000 dead. And this is a country that's allied with Tehran. So strategically, it's like embarrassing. It's embarrassing for the U.S. and it's worrisome to Israel and the Gulf Arabs. But I think one thing the president said in Israel, which was encouraging to many who want action against Syria, is when he talked about chemical weapons, he didn't just say Syria using chemical weapons is a game changer. That Syria moving chemical weapons and distributing them into the hands of terrorist groups, which is what the Israelis wanted to hear. So I actually think he is now lowering the threshold for some kind of action.
And it's very interesting that because chemical weapons was, you know, the big question this last week. Tzipi Livni, the new Israeli justice minister, said publicly that they know that chemical weapons were used. The Americans are saying no. So what does that mean about a red line and who's, you know, determining whether they were used or whether they weren't used? And then, you know, you've got this whole issue. I've just come back from Europe. The British and the French are going to lower the barrier and probably allow the Syrian rebels to be armed.
They're further ahead than the U.S.
Way ahead. So is the U.S. going to be leading from behind again?
You know, on the broader point, it's so interesting. We just marked the 10th anniversary of a militant intervention by the United States, which had obviously huge consequences that we're living with today. This Syria case is an example of consequences of non-interventionism. In other words, a president of the United States cannot really catch a break in the Middle East. Either you're intervening too much, you're not intervening enough. We might wind up a couple of years from now thinking, man, we really should have done something a couple of years earlier to stop what is unfolding in Syria from unfolding.
We face some of the same problems. We're not even really sure who this opposition is and who we would be arming.
Yeah, well, when it comes to arming, too, how that gets done is interesting. And I would go back to some of the successes of Obama's trip. And I think one of the big unheralded successes is Netanyahu's apology to Turkish Prime Minister Recep Erdogan, because that creates an interesting new alliance, not just between Israel and Turkey, who have so much in common, really, and were really moving forward diplomatically before the incident with the flotilla 2 years ago. But it also creates a kind of an interesting new Sunni alliance, if you will, Egypt, Turkey, Qatar. So it could be that as these anti-Assad countries sort of ally under one banner, that gives the Syria...
But I also think she's right on that. The Israelis, the Turks, all of those are very concerned about this. But I also think we don't know who the opposition is a bit of a straw man. Because,
totally
yes, there are bad actors.
We could also shape that. We can shape the opposition to a certain degree.
And the fact of not being there means we have no equity, no investment, no shaping, no nothing. We don't really know them. And the fact that all these bad guys are there is because of the vacuum that has been created by
non-intervention.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, you make an excellent point, and I think Netanyahu is not the kind of guy, you know this, who's apt to apologize, go around apologizing.
Yeah, I was surprised he did.
Yeah. He's not a big
vital alliance.
No, because he realized that that Israel and Turkey have a common dire problem, the threat of Syrian chemical weapons,
Absolutely.
and he had to swallow his pride and say, I'm going to work with this guy on this.
Maybe he wanted to be, brought down off the ledge.
We only have a couple minutes left. Rana, I want to bring in your economic expert here and talk for just a minute about Cyprus. I think the idea that tiny nation could set off shockwaves throughout the entire global economy and affect our stock markets is kind of amazing to a lot of people. On the other hand, when you hear that one of the things they're considering is actually taxing everyone's bank account, I think that sends a shudder of fear through everyone with a bank account.
I think it does. I mean, if you look at the size of Cyprus, it's tiny. It has an economy about the size of Vermont. So it's 0.2% of the Eurozone. But what it underscores is the fact that years on into the European debt crisis, there's still no common way to resolve a country that's going into sovereign collapse, to get a banking system out of bankruptcy. Europeans don't know when these things happen what will happen. And as you say, the first proposition in Cyprus actually would have included a one-time tax, essentially taking depositors' money. Mom and pop folks in Cyprus could lose their money. That's now presumably off the table, and it looks like the Cypriots are going to be trying to hit some of the Russian offshore money that's in Cyprus. But the bottom line is that if you live in another beleaguered country in Europe with bad public finances like Spain or Italy, you might well be thinking about going to the bank and taking your money out.
I would think that's probably right.
Yeah, the former chairman of Cyprus's central bank said that just the fact that the EU, the ECB was floating this idea and the authorities in Cyprus were floating this idea means this is the beginning of the end of the euro, that if people have no confidence that they can deposit their funds in a bank and not get whacked, not get a haircut when there's some sort of crisis, it creates insecurity.
Real quickly, though, another deadline tonight for a possible agreement. Do you think we will see real reactions in our own financial markets this week?
I think that if there's no deal tonight, and if there's the beginnings of a disorderly collapse and exit from the euro on Monday, absolutely. If there is an agreement and it looks like there's a timeline for Cyprus to work this problem out where it doesn't cause social instability in that country, then I think we'll be okay. And nobody knows yet.
We will all be watching. Thank you all for a terrific roundtable.